Talent is supposed to fix things. That's the promise fans are sold every time a team drafts a new quarterback. Get the right arm, the right mindset, the right swagger, and suddenly years of dysfunction disappear. But what if that promise is a lie? What if talent doesn't rescue a broken system, it just exposes it faster? That's the uncomfortable reality staring everyone in the face right now as Shedeur Sanders finds himself dropped into the chaos of the Cleveland Browns, a franchise that knows how to talk about development, but somehow never delivers it. From the outside, it looked like the perfect test, a confident rookie with toughness, leadership, and a reputation for handling pressure, walking into an organization desperate for stability. Expectations were sky high, not just because of his name, but because fans were starving for proof that this time would be different. Instead, what they're watching unfold feels painfully familiar. A young quarterback absorbing hits, taking blame, and being asked to rise above problems that existed long before he took his first snap. And the more games that pass, the clearer it becomes that this isn't a story about a rookie struggling. It's a story about a system that hasn't learned a single lesson. What makes this moment explode isn't just what's happening on the field. It's the growing gap between what fans see every Sunday and what they're being told to believe afterward. Broken protections get reframed as learning moments. Predictable play calling gets dressed up as long-term vision. Losses pile up and somehow responsibility evaporates. The conversation keeps circling the quarterback while the structure around him remains untouched. And for a fan base that's lived through this cycle over and over again, patience isn't wearing thin, it's already gone. That tension reached a boiling point when voices from the outside stepped in to defend the very leadership fans believe is failing yet another quarterback. Instead of accountability, they heard justification. Instead of urgency, they got reassurance. And that's when frustration turned into something louder. Because this isn't just about wins and losses anymore. It's about watching another talented player fight to survive in an environment that feels more interested in protecting reputations than developing quarterbacks. And the deeper you look, the harder it is to ignore the question nobody wants to answer. If Shedeur Sanders was drafted to change Cleveland's future, why does everything around him look exactly the same? The word everyone keeps leaning on is development. It sounds responsible, it sounds patient, it sounds like a plan. But in Cleveland, development has become a shield, a way to delay accountability while the same problems repeat themselves week after week. Fans are told that mistakes are part of the process, that rookies need time, that growth isn't linear. All of that is true in a healthy environment. The issue is that nothing about this situation looks healthy. When people talk about fair development, they're assuming the foundation exists. What if it doesn't? Look closely at what Sanders has been given and what he hasn't. He didn't walk into a system tailored to his strengths. He walked into one that expects him to adapt instantly while offering little margin for error. Protection breaks down, routes take too long to develop, and adjustments come late or not at all. Then, when the drive stalls, the microscope zooms straight to the quarterback. Not the design, not the preparation, not the refusal to pivot, just the kid trying to make something out of chaos.
That's where the illusion kicks in. On paper, it looks like patience. In reality, it's exposure. Development requires structure, consistent messaging, clear expectations, and game plans that actually evolve. What Sanders is experiencing feels more like survival training. Every snap becomes a test of toughness instead of a step forward. And while fans are told this struggle is necessary, they've seen this movie enough times to know how it ends. The quarterback takes the heat, the system stays intact. What makes it worse is how selectively blame gets distributed. When Sanders misses a read, it's framed as a learning moment he must own. When the play call puts him in an impossible spot, it gets dismissed as execution. When protection collapses instantly, the conversation somehow loops back to quarterback awareness. That imbalance is what fans can't ignore. Fair development doesn't mean shielding a player from criticism, it means giving them a fighting chance before judging the outcome. And right now, that chance feels theoretical at best. There's also the timeline argument, the idea that everyone just needs to relax and let things breathe. But time only helps when progress is visible. When the same breakdowns keep showing up, patience stops being wisdom and starts becoming avoidance. Fans aren't demanding miracles, they're asking for evidence that something is being built. Instead, what they see is a rookie being asked to solve problems that coaching is supposed to prevent. And this is where the illusion fully cracks, because if development were truly the priority, the system would bend before the quarterback breaks. Adjustments would come early, protection schemes would change, play calling would evolve. Instead, Sanders is absorbing hit after hit while being told this is all part of the plan. For people watching closely, that doesn't look like growth. It looks like another talent being tested by a structure that never tests itself. And once you start noticing that pattern, it becomes impossible to ignore who keeps getting protected and who doesn't. The moment everything boiled over wasn't a blown coverage or another stalled drive. It was a sentence, a clean, confident defense delivered on a national platform by Emmanuel Acho, insisting that Kevin Stefanski's handling of Shedeur Sanders had been fair, measured, even strategic. On the surface, it sounded like a reasonable take. Coaches deserve time, rookies struggle, development is an instant. But to Browns fans, that comment didn't land as analysis, it landed as erasure. Because what fans heard wasn't perspective, it was dismissal. It ignored the weekly realities they've been watching unfold in real time. The missed adjustments, the protection failures, the way Sanders keeps absorbing punishment while explanations pile up around him. Acho's words felt like another voice talking past the people who actually sit through the games, who watch the same mistakes resurface with different quarterbacks wearing the same colors. And that's why the reaction was immediate and explosive. Not because fans can't handle disagreement, but because they're tired of being told not to believe their own eyes. What made it worse was the timing. This wasn't said after a promising stretch or visible growth. It came while frustrations were already simmering, while patience was running on fumes. To many, it sounded like yet another media figure stepping in to protect the coach while shifting focus away from the structure that keeps failing young quarterbacks. Backlash wasn't just emotional. It was accumulated. Years of recycled narratives finally found a trigger. Acho didn't just defend Stefanski, he framed the situation in a way that suggested fans were overreacting, that criticism was premature, that the process was working exactly as intended. That's where the line was crossed. Browns fans have heard that tune before. Different quarterbacks, same reassurances, same ending. When Acho spoke, it felt less like analysis and more like a rerun of the excuses they've been fed for decades. The pushback wasn't subtle. Online, radio, comment sections, it all erupted. Fans weren't debating football philosophy. They were challenging the credibility of media voices who, in their view, kept shielding leadership from real scrutiny. And once that trust cracks, everything after it gets questioned. When Acho later appeared to soften or shift his stance, it only deepened the frustration. To fans, it didn't look like nuance, it looked like retreat after backlash. This was never about one commentator having an opinion, it was about what that opinion represented. Another reminder that the national conversation often lags behind local reality, that reputations get defended more aggressively than results, and when someone with a wide platform ignores the patterns fans have lived through, it doesn't calm the noise, it amplifies it. Because now the debate wasn't just about Shedeur Sanders or Kevin Stefanski anymore. It was about who gets protected in this league and who gets left to take the hits when the system keeps falling apart. Cleveland fans didn't need spreadsheets or advanced metrics to understand what was happening. They've lived it over and over. Different names on the jersey, same sinking feeling by mid-season. Hope arrives in the form of a new quarterback, optimism spikes just long enough to believe, and then the cracks start spreading. Protection slips, confidence fades, blame shifts, and eventually the quarterback becomes the problem. The uncomfortable truth is that this pattern didn't start with Sanders, he just happens to be the latest name written into it. It's impossible to talk about this without rewinding. Baker Mayfield came in with swagger and belief, lifted the franchise out of irrelevance, and for a moment it looked like the nightmare was finally over. Then the erosion began. Injuries, inconsistent messaging, pressure to carry a system that wouldn't adapt. When the results dipped, the conversation shifted fast. Suddenly, Baker was the issue.
The solution? Reset the position again while everything else stayed mostly the same. That's the part fans can't unsee. Quarterbacks rotate, coaches and structures remain. Every new passer is sold as the answer, and every time the system asks more from the quarterback than it gives back. When success flashes early, it gets credited to coaching. When things fall apart, it lands on the player. It's a cycle that protects leadership while burning through talent, and Cleveland has become painfully efficient at it. Now drop Shedeur Sanders into that history, and the warning signs get louder. The same rationalizations, the same calls for patience, the same arguments about execution. Fans recognize the rhythm. They know when the script is turning against the quarterback, because they've memorized this ending already. It always starts subtly, with learning moments and growing pains, before mutating into doubts about readiness and toughness. What makes this pattern so damaging is how normal it's become. Each time, it's framed as a unique situation, different roster, different era, different challenges, but the outcomes keep lining up too cleanly to ignore. The quarterback absorbs punishment, confidence erodes, and soon enough, the organization is scanning the horizon for the next fix, not the next solution, the next distraction. That's why fans are so defensive of Sanders right now, not because they think he's perfect, but because they've seen how this process works when it gets rolling. They know how fast a young quarterback can go from hopeful cornerstone to expendable scapegoat, and once that shift happens, there's rarely a way back. The real question isn't whether Sanders can survive this stretch, it's whether the Browns can finally admit that their quarterback problems don't start under center. And until they do, this graveyard keeps growing, no matter how talented the next name happens to be. Strip away the narratives, the post-game quotes, and the talking points, and the tape tells a much cleaner story. This isn't a quarterback randomly imploding, it's a quarterback operating inside constant instability. From the opening drives, the same issues jump off the screen. Pockets collapse before routes can fully develop, edge rushers get free paths, interior pressure shows up almost instantly. When that happens snap after snap, decision-making stops being about progress and starts becoming about survival. Watch how often plays break down before they even begin. The timing is off because the structure doesn't hold long enough for timing to matter. Instead of stepping confidently into throws, the quarterback is forced to reset, drift, or bail entirely. And when those off-schedule moments don't result in miracles, they get labeled as mistakes. What doesn't get labeled is the reason those moments exist in the first place. There's also the predictability problem. Defensive fronts aren't guessing, they're attacking. Blitzes arrive exactly where weaknesses have already been exposed, and adjustments come late, if at all. It's one thing to challenge a rookie, it's another to repeatedly put him in situations where defenses know what's coming before the ball is snapped. That's not growth through adversity, that's repetition through neglect. The tape also shows effort that doesn't get enough credit. Standing tall in the pocket knowing the hit is coming, finishing throws while taking contact, trying to extend plays because the design offers no margin. Those aren't habits of a player shrinking under pressure, they're signs of someone trying to compensate for a system that gives him very little back. And over time, that kind of pressure chips away at confidence, no matter how mentally tough the player is. What fans see, over and over, is a quarterback being asked to fix everything in real time. When a play succeeds, it's a grind. When it fails, it's loud and instant. There's no room for clean progression, no stretch where things feel controlled. And when mistakes happen under those conditions, they're treated as proof rather than symptoms. This is why the tape matters so much. It removes the comfort of excuses. It shows that the problems don't start with footwork or reads. They start with protection, design, and in-game response. It shows a talented player playing on his heels instead of being allowed to play ahead of defenses. And once you see that, it's impossible to blame everything on inexperience.
Because the film doesn't show a quarterback falling apart, it shows a structure failing repeatedly and a player doing whatever he can to stay upright inside it. And the longer that continues, the harder it becomes to pretend this is just part of the learning curve rather than a warning sign everyone should be taking seriously. Leadership shows up loudest when things go wrong, and that's exactly where this situation keeps getting uncomfortable. Week after week, the Browns stumble through the same breakdowns, and yet the message from the top never really changes. After the losses, the tone is calm, controlled, carefully worded. There's talk about execution, about trust in the process, about things that need to be cleaned up. What's missing is urgency. What's missing is ownership, and fans are starting to notice the gap between how bad it looks and how lightly it gets addressed. Listen closely to the press conferences, and you'll hear the same phrases recycled with different dates attached. We have to be better. We'll look at the tape. Credit to the opponent. It all sounds professional, but it also sounds evasive. When leadership avoids specifics, accountability gets diluted. Instead of identifying what failed and why, responsibility floats just enough to never land anywhere solid. And when that happens repeatedly, it doesn't come off as patience, it comes off as avoidance. On the sideline, the image doesn't help. Arms crossed, expression unchanged, headset on while the offense stalls again. There's no visible adjustment, no sense that something different is about to happen. That stoicism might read as composure in other contexts, but when paired with stagnation, it starts to feel like detachment. Fans aren't asking for theatrics, they're asking for proof that leadership recognizes the gravity of what's unfolding. The most frustrating part is how accountability seems to flow in only one direction. When the quarterback struggles, it's dissected frame by frame. When the game plan fails, it gets softened into vague language. That imbalance sends a message, intentional or not, about who carries the burden when things fall apart, and over time, that message erodes trust. You can't preach development while refusing to publicly interrogate your own decisions. This is where frustration turns personal for fans. They don't want scapegoats, they want honesty. They want leadership that calls out its own missteps with the same clarity it expects from its players. Instead, what they keep getting is insulation, leadership that remains untouched while young quarterbacks absorb the fallout. And when leadership refuses to show pressure, it invites a dangerous question. If nothing ever appears urgent, if nothing ever looks like it's truly on the line, why should anyone believe meaningful change is coming? Because from where fans are standing, this doesn't feel like steady leadership guiding a rebuild. It feels like a system comfortable enough to stay exactly as it is, no matter who gets caught underneath it.
This is where the disconnect becomes impossible to ignore. On one side, you have the fans, the people watching every snap, living through every stalled drive, every repeated breakdown. On the other, you have a media narrative that keeps smoothing over rough edges, insisting that patience is the answer and that criticism is premature. The frustration isn't just about losing football, it's about being told that what feels obvious in real time somehow isn't real at all. When analysts step in to defend the structure, it's often framed as balance, context, long-term thinking. But for Browns fans, it doesn't sound like analysis anymore. It sounds like insulation. The same voices who dissect quarterback mistakes in slow motion suddenly get vague when it's time to talk about coaching failures. And that selective clarity is exactly what fuels the backlash. It creates the sense that some people are allowed to fail quietly while others get dragged immediately. The idea that fans are being emotional or reactionary only deepens the divide. This isn't a single bad game sparking outrage. This is cumulative, years of watching quarterbacks cycle through the same fate under the same explanations. Fans didn't wake up angry one Sunday. They arrived here slowly, after seeing the same problems resurface no matter who's under center. When that lived experience gets brushed aside by national voices, resentment turns into rejection. The problem isn't disagreement. Fans expect that. The problem is when commentary ignores context, when analysts talk about development without acknowledging the environment, when they praise stability without questioning whether that stability is actually productive.
From the fan perspective, it feels like the story is being told backward, focusing on the symptoms while refusing to name the cause. That's why defenses of the coaching staff land so poorly. They don't align with what people are seeing. Protection isn't improving. Adjustments aren't coming faster. The offense doesn't look different from week to week. So when media figures insist progress is happening beneath the surface, fans start asking where exactly they're supposed to see it. This gap between perception and reality is what erodes trust fastest. Fans stop listening. They stop believing, not because they think they know more than everyone else, but because their experience keeps being invalidated. And once that happens, every media defense starts sounding less like insight and more like spin. At that point, the conversation isn't about football anymore. It's about credibility, about who's actually paying attention. And the longer national narratives lag behind local reality, the louder fans get, not to be heard, but to be taken seriously. The effect this is having on Shedeur Sanders doesn't always show up in box scores. It shows up in the pauses between answers, in the way he chooses his words carefully, almost too carefully, like someone already aware of how quickly narratives can turn. He doesn't deflect blame, he doesn't point fingers, he doesn't lash out. Instead, he absorbs everything, the hits, the losses, the questions, and carries on like that's what he's supposed to do. And that composure is impressive, but it's also revealing. You can see it in his body language. Helmet on, eyes forward, shoulders slumped just enough to hint at exhaustion. Not physical exhaustion, mental. The kind that comes from knowing you're being judged on outcomes you don't fully control. Every game adds weight, not just from the pressure to perform, but from the growing sense that no matter how composed he is, no matter how hard he works, the environment around him isn't changing. That wears on any quarterback, especially a rookie. Confidence in this league is fragile, and it's built through reinforcement. Clean pockets, clear reads, coaches who adjust when something isn't working. When those things don't exist consistently, quarterbacks start playing tight. Not scared, guarded. They stop trusting the system because the system hasn't earned that trust back. That's not a flaw. That's human. What makes this situation dangerous is that Sanders keeps being asked to be the solution before being given support. He's expected to elevate broken plays, overcome busted protections, and still make the right decision under immediate pressure. When it works, it's called grit. When it doesn't, it's framed as inexperience. Either way, the burden stays on him, and over time, that burden shifts how a quarterback sees the game. There's also the quiet pressure of optics. Every struggling rookie knows how fast the conversation can turn. One week, it's about patience. The next week, it's about competition. Benchings get discussed as resets. Development suddenly means watching from the sideline. And when that starts hovering in the background, it changes everything. Sanders isn't just playing defenses, he's playing against the clock of perception. What fans see is a player trying to lead through instability without being allowed to stabilize himself first. They see effort that doesn't translate to progress, not because of lack of talent, but because the structure keeps falling apart around him. And that's where concern replaces frustration. Because confidence, once chipped away enough, doesn't always come back easily. This isn't just about a tough rookie season. It's about whether Sanders is being built up or slowly worn down, whether the lessons he's learning are about growth or about survival. And if nothing changes soon, the damage won't be visible all at once. It'll show up later, in hesitation, in guarded play, in a quarterback who learned too early that doing everything right still isn't enough when the system refuses to meet you halfway. This is the point where excuses stop working, not because fans are impatient, but because patterns don't lie. When the same failures keep showing up with different players, different seasons, and different expectations, the problem stops being coincidence. It becomes structural. And right now, what's happening isn't a rough stretch or a temporary setback. It's exposure, a system being stress-tested by a rookie who was never supposed to carry this much weight this early. What makes this a breaking point isn't just the losing, it's the sameness of it all. The same stalled drives, the same explanations, the same insistence that everything is unfolding according to plan while the product on the field says otherwise. Fans can handle rebuilding. They can handle learning curves. What they can't handle is being told that stagnation is progress and that concern is overreaction. This season has quietly turned into a referendum, not on one quarterback, but on an entire way of operating. It's forcing uncomfortable questions that can't be deflected forever. How many young players have to absorb the blame before accountability starts flowing upward?
How many times can leadership promise growth without showing change? At what point does patience stop being a virtue and start becoming permission? For the quarterback at the center of this storm, the stakes are bigger than wins and losses. Careers are shaped by environments. Confidence is either reinforced or eroded. Right now, the fear among fans isn't that he can't play, it's that he's being molded by chaos instead of clarity, that the lessons he's learning are the wrong ones, taught by repetition instead of intention. And this is where the organization has to choose, not publicly, not with words, but with action. Because pretending this is fine doesn't protect the future, it endangers it. You don't fix a broken foundation by swapping the furniture. You fix it by admitting it's cracked in the first place. If nothing changes, history isn't just going to repeat itself. It's going to add another name to a list no franchise should be proud of, another talent that could have been something more in a different situation. And fans see that coming from miles away. They're not angry because they hate the team. They're angry because they know exactly how this story usually ends, and they're watching the pages turn all over again.